All right, everybody. In this video, we're going to show the sum and difference formulas for sine. And we're going to take advantage of the cofunction identities that we proved, which came from the difference formula for cosine. And so you'll see that the difference formula for sine comes from the difference formula for cosine because we're going to use the cofunction identities. So sine of u minus v. This is the difference formula for sine. So I'm going to rewrite this using the cofunction identity and write it as cosine of pi over 2 minus u minus v, because that's the cofunction identity for sine to cosine, or cosine to sine, it's whichever way you want to think about it. This negative distributes to both of these numbers inside here. So we have cosine of pi over 2 minus u plus v. And I'm grouping it this way because now I'm going to actually use the sum formula for sine, where this whole thing right here is u and the v is just v. And so I'm going to use the sum formula for cosine, and the sum formula for cosine is cosine of u, which in this case is the pi over 2 minus u, cosine of v minus sine of u, which is pi over 2 minus u, sine of v. And then I'm going to use the cofunction identity again. This right here is just equal to sine of u. The cosine v is going to stay cosine v. And this right here is just equal to cosine of u, sine of v. So I just used the cofunction identity at the beginning, and then I used it again here. You do not have to know how these identities came to be. You just have to know when and how to use them. So this is the difference formula for sine. It's right here. And we can do a similar argument for the sum formula. Actually, the sum formula is even easier to use than that, because we can use the difference formula to find the sum formula. We could do the same thing. We could have done the same thing for cosine. I'll show you what that looks like now. So what we can do is we can use the difference formula by writing sine of u plus v as sine of u minus negative v. And then in the difference formula above, anywhere I see u, I'm going to keep u, and anywhere I see v, I'm going to put a negative v. And so I get sine u cosine negative v minus cosine u sine negative v. I don't know if you remember the even and odd identities that we had, but sine is an odd function and cosine is an even function. And for even functions, if there's a negative inside, like there's this negative v in here, it's the same value as if it gives you the same y value as if you were at positive v. And so you can just change that to a positive v. But for an odd function, sine of negative v is equal to negative sine of v, so this becomes plus cosine u sine v. And so this is the sum formula for sine, as right here. So we have our sum and difference formulas for sine, which came from using the cofunction identity, which came from the difference formula for cosine. So all of these are derived from the difference formula for cosine, and that will become the case as we fill out that entire formula sheet that you have. Okay, so now we're going to use these formulas to prove some identities. Okay, let's start with this one. We're going to prove the identity that sine of pi minus x equals sine of x. All right, so let's use the difference formula for sine. I see a difference inside of this function, and so I'm going to use the difference formula for sine. where u is pi and v is x. Okay, so I'm just using that distance formula, or difference formula. And again, if you want, if it helps you, you can write down the formula right on top here. So this is going to be sine u cosine v minus cosine u sine v. So again, u is pi, v is x. So sine, starting with the left side of the equation, because that is the more complicated side, sine of pi minus x is going to be sine of pi cosine x minus cosine pi sine x. Now, knowing what we know about the unit circle, sine of pi is 0. So this whole term goes to 0 because sine of pi is 0. Okay. Cosine of pi is -1. And so a -1 gives me a +1 times sine of x, which is just sine of x. And we have found that this is indeed an identity. Right? All right, so we want, given a sine of u and cosine of v, and we know that u is in the 3rd quadrant, and v looks like it's in the 4th quadrant, we want to find the exact value of sine of u plus v. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to use the sum formula for sine. So the sum formula for sine is, we have sine of u cosine v plus cosine u sine v. All right. So we are already given sine of u. It's up here. It's -3/5. We are already given cosine of v. It's 12/13. So I can already find the value of this first term. This first term is -3/5 times 12/13. But I don't know cosine of u, and I don't know sine of v. But I can find those using using the techniques that we learned in the previous unit. The definition of sine of u, the definition of that is y over r. So the y coordinate here is the -3, and the radius is the 5. And knowing that x squared plus y squared equals r squared, we can find the value of x. Now this is a 3, 4, 5 right triangle, so I don't even need to do that math out. This comes out to 4. And since we're in the, u is in the 3rd quadrant, this is going to be a -4. And so that means that cosine of u is -4/5. Knowing that, likewise, knowing that cosine of v is equal to x over r, that means that x is 12 and y is what we're looking for. R is 13. And this is also a Pythagorean triple. So a Pythagorean triple is, there's 3, 4, 5 right triangles, and then there's 5, 12, 13 is another one. So this is going to be 5, but we're in the 4th quadrant here, so y is going to be negative. And so sine of v is -5. Oh, wait. Yeah, -5/13. And so now when I multiply this all out, I get -16/65. So just multiply it all out, add it together, and you'll get -16/65. This is the exact value of sine of u plus v. And again, this is something you probably could have put in the calculator, and it would have spit out a decimal, and you could use math fraction to get this fraction here. but I want you to know the algebra behind it. All right, I'll see you in the next video when we do the sum and difference formulas for